Welcome to another Workshops for Moms. We're about to go live on Facebook. So let me hit that button.
Yay.
Live. Let's see. Yep, it looks like it's working, everybody.
Okay. Well,
Wait, I don't think it's quite ready. We'll give it a second. Okay. Let's see. Perfect. It looks like we are live on Facebook for our Workshop Mom Parenting Panel. Hello, everyone.
hello. Good morning.
Oh, Ren Roberts here, and I'm going to turn it over to our amazing moderator for today, who also happens to be my mom, and to share some amazing tips with you all about supporting kids when parents argue. So let's help those little humans out, or even big humans, about what to do. So we'll turn it over to Tracy.
Thank you, Ren Roberts, for your tech support today. She is our wing woman, and not a surprise with that because she teaches everybody tech. Well, everybody, moms and anyone caring for or working with children and teens, this is the monthly parenting panel hosted by Workshops for Moms. Once a month, we bring you speakers and experts covering one topic of interest to our community in a roundtable format. Pardon me. We're all about supporting the important work you're doing to raise kids, which is what we're all about here. Helpful mom tips combined with mom self-care. And I'm Tracy Cheney, the moderator for today's show. And as Ren said, our topic is supporting kids when parents argue. Now, I'm so happy to have some wonderful women on our panel this morning. They're going to be able to share challenges and insights and best tips with us. And when I introduce you, if you'd please say hi so the listeners can identify your voice. And I'll also ask you to repeat your name as you answer questions throughout the panel. So this morning, as I said, Tracy Cheney here, and I taught in 14 schools. So I've worked with thousands of parents and kids and saw firsthand how strife at home affects kids' school performance and their just child development. And Yola Cruz, hi Yola.
Hello.
Is a certified relationship coach dedicated to helping mothers prevent divorce and find peace and balance in their marriages. We have Josie Laporto Freeborn.
Hi,
and
everybody.
Josie specializes in coaching mom entrepreneurs, nurturing their sales confidence while breaking through limiting beliefs of all kinds. Marjie Hadad. Hi, Marjie.
Hi, Marjie Hadad. Great to be here, moms.
She's a global public relations expert and author of the best-selling book, The Power of PR Parenting, How to Raise Confident, Resilient, and Successful Children Using Public Relations Strategies.
True
Rebecca,
story.
Rebecca Prowse. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Is a life coach and aroma practitioner, and she's committed to empowering moms in being present and rejuvenating their wellness and finding true fulfillment in motherhood. Did I get around to everybody?
Yes, ma'am.
All righty. Well, let's get started here. Let me see. I have a funny message sitting here on my screen I want to get rid of. All righty. So this is a sensitive topic, but it's an important one. And you know, panelists, let's start with talking about ways that we can, I don't want to say argue better, but squabbles come up. We all know that happens and in a close relationship. And if you've got a, you know, something from your practice that you've seen, something that comes up, but a good tip to help parents, I want to say argue better, if that's if that's a fair thing to say. So Josie, would you like to jump in on that one and we'll kind of go around? It's a roundtable discussion.
For sure. Coming from a place of love is one of the biggest things that I always say. Argue from a place of love, not from a place of, and we don't use that 4-letter H word because I don't like it, but the place of hate or disgust. We can disagree and we can agree to disagree, or we can not agree to disagree. My husband and I have a relationship a little bit different than, say, one that I grew up in, where arguing was something that happened and it was scary for me as a child. And I knew deep down as a kid my parents loved each other, but as a child I didn't know if my parents were arguing and then they were going to split up, or arguing and then something. Like, the imagination goes so many different places as a child. And as an adult, when you argue, even when my husband and I argue, I think, well, we know what we're arguing about and we know it's going to be resolved, but my children don't necessarily know that. So I try to bring myself back to how I felt as a little girl, listening to when my parents argued, and then think, oh, shoot, my kids might be feeling that same way. So I always say, come from a place of love and let the children know, we're disagreeing just like you would with your friends. And it is from a loving place so that we could try to be back on the same page.
Well, you do bring up a good point that statistics show from, different studies that have been done. One of the first thing kids think is divorce. They're going to get divorced. Now, that may be happening in a relationship, but that is something that's shown. And I've certainly heard that with children at school when you ask them what's the matter. That is a huge fear with kids. Yola, you also work with families. Is this something that you see common too?
Oh, yes. Yeah, it's Yola Cruz here. It's a very, very high alert topic, right? As I would say, because children, we can model conflict. I would call it a conflict, right? Because we are going to agree and disagree, like Josie was saying, on different topics. But it's how do we model to our children how to solve disagreements is the most important part. I grew up with, there was no modeling of agreement. There was, fighting, and it was really, really scary. And my parents did get divorced. So I can totally see when I used to argue with my husband, how my kids were petrified. Now, when we have learned how to resolve conflict better, they have safety in conflict, which is actually really almost like a crazy idea of how can you feel safe when there's conflict. But the way we resolve conflict is, even if my emotions run high and I speak to my husband in words that maybe are not ideal, or maybe I cry in conflict, I make a point of staying with that and staying with the children in that moment, and not running away and slamming doors and things like that. I show them how the conflict ends. Instead of in the past, I would show them just the beginning of the conflict and run away, and then we wouldn't be talking for a while. Now we finish, we ride the wave of conflict in a way. If we know that we can't, that's fine. And I'll make a point that I will talk to every single one of them after, and I'll explain what happened. So they know that conflict is normal. Notice what mommy said, notice what daddy said. We discussed this situation. It didn't work out quite well, as well as I wanted to, but now we're hugging and we're kissing each other. So they know that conflict is absolutely normal in a relationship, because there are two people on opposite ends. Sometimes we have different ideas.
And you really brought up a good point. That's also, it is seen in the data that if you talk to the kids about what happened rather than ignore it, I mean, that seems to be the trend now, is be upfront about it. Would you agree with that, Margie? I mean, you deal with, I think as a PR specialist, you deal with all kinds of conflict.
That's the understatement of the year. Yes, well, let me regain my composure here for just a moment. And yes, I'm Marjie Hadad, and I've been in global public relations for 30 years. Look, there's a couple of themes running through what Josie and Yola have shared already, and I'm certain that Rebecca will also echo. From a public relations standpoint, two things. First of all, expectations, preparation, words, tone, delivery, and modeling. These are the core themes. What am I talking about? When you're arguing and you have a disagreement, the question is, how are you going to show your children a healthy way to disagree? So what kind of communication channel or venue or type of communication are you going to choose in order to share your discontent? Do you go quiet if you don't like something that you've heard, which is an example of don't let everything get to you. Just let it roll right by. Water off a duck's back. Do you express your discontent in a respectful way? Example, use an I message, first person rather than second person. I feel, I believe, I think. This is the way I see it, as opposed to, you rotten, how could you do this? I hate what you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if you make it an inanimate object, whatever the activity is that you do not like, I would prefer that the dishes be done. I would prefer that the clothes be picked up. If you've noticed, now it's becoming a thing. I haven't attacked anybody or accused anybody. I'm just showing my preferences from my perspective. And that's another way to communicate. And then the other point that was made in a matter of talking with the kids, it's called a debrief in PR terms. So the thing happened, the event happened, meaning the argument, the exchange of words or the exchange of body language, because communication is not necessarily just words. It can be, or some variation thereof. Debrief with the kids. How did you feel about that? What did it mean to you? And then after you listen to them, then what you would normally do in a professional debrief is go through all the various points and talk it through so that they understand what was done, what we can do better, and how they can choose to react. They can either pay attention and get upset, or they can go, oh, they're just at it again. I'm going to go do my own thing until they're finished.
Okay, that is very thorough, but it also feels like you're in control. So Rebecca, jump in here to this discussion.
Yes, hi, Rebecca Prouse here. I love what you ladies have contributed. And one thing that I would invite is the concept of seeking to understand. What I saw role modeled as a child was my parents seemed like they were friends and they would discuss things. And if you're able to detach, I don't want to say, you don't ignore how you're feeling, but if you can detach for a moment enough to let yourself listen and acknowledge what the other person is saying, what your spouse is saying to you, and have an opening for seeking to understand first, I feel that's a modeling that you would probably love to see your children do after you. And I think that can show, to me, that is love and respect. And sometimes I say go a step further, is that sometimes you may need to, most of the time probably, handle in your own time how you were feeling. So with my work, I have a formula that we go through that helps mom deal with how she felt and processing her own to see if there is another perspective for her to see. And instead of thinking that this argument is an attack on her, is really seeking to understand and role modeling that to the children. So that's one thing I'd like to add. And the other, I think someone did mention this already, is when you're talking to the children, acknowledging or listening for how they may be feeling and putting a name to that feeling, so they understand that feelings come, feelings pass, and it's a good skill for them to know long term.
So, well, this doesn't sound like the household I grew up in. And unfortunately, the pattern was dad walked out the door, mom's yelling and he walks out the door. And I think the belief was too, I mean, my mom was the first woman divorced in our community. It was horrible. The feeling always expressed was the kids are resilient and they get over it. And I don't know if we feel so much that, the thing is, in the heat of the moment, are you really thinking about the kids? You're involved in whatever, the issue is. And I think, you're wound up and, heated. And, is it okay just to not mention it? I mean, is that what you're feeling these days, that we just kind of, the way it was with us, just kind of ignore it and it'll blow over? Anybody want to jump on that?
I think it needs to be addressed.
So we should talk about it with kids.
I think so, mainly because it's real. And whenever there is some sort of interaction that might be negative, or there might be a disagreement or a conflict, it needs to be addressed so that you can get to the other side and be peaceful and happy and loving again. And you can even argue and have a conflict in a loving way. You get to disagree. You might have to agree to disagree on certain topics. And that's a good thing to teach your kids too, that not everything is rainbows and puppy dogs. And guess what? That's okay if you see things one way and your partner sees things another way, as long as you can respect each other's opinions. That's what's important.
So I would say that this is all very adult and feels very much in control. But I know from working in the schools that I've worked in, and this was not a common thing. And so you've got kids that are feeling, highly stressed. And wondering if we could address some of that a bit. If what advice that we can give to people like myself who are in, schools, mostly in schools if we're dealing with kids, but there are coaches there that you've got kids in after school things. What can we do? What advice do you have for us in being able to deal with kids that are looking, very stressed? Sometimes they tell you what it is, sometimes not. And it seems like in the climate we're in today, feel as a teacher, I can't say much. So what do we need to be looking out for, and what can we do? Josie, do you have some advice on that?
Yes, actually, it's I am in the schools a lot as well. I'm not an educator, teacher like you are, but I volunteer at my children's school in various capacities. So I'm there every day in some way, shape, or form. And I don't naturally interact with the children when they're having a conflict or a breakdown, but I see it. And sometimes I do have the ability to speak to children. Now, looking at conflict, not necessarily just with parents, but children will imitate their own resolution to their conflict, oftentimes by what they see, feel, and hear at home. And so oftentimes when we're seeing things at school, it raises a little bit of a flag saying, okay, how is this child dealing with stuff here? What's going on at home? And it might not be anything at home, but my children imitate. I think everybody's children, it's just what they do. They learn, they model. And I think in past panels, we've spoken about this over and over again, is I really have to look at the world through my children's eyes and how my children look at me and my behavior and my modeling for them, because they're not just going to take that and do it at home. I watch my son and daughter, they bicker and they fight and they back and forth. And sometimes I stop and go, oh, they're bantering like my husband and I do. Or, oh, they're really getting on it. But where did they see that before? And oftentimes they've either seen it at somebody else's house or with their friends, or maybe with my husband and I, if we maybe had a bad communication moment. And so they bring that then to school because that's what they're learning.
Yes, I would say that's true. And I would say over the decades, I just think we're in a worse situation in dealing with things. It's like it's okay almost. And I think social media, all this stuff plays into it for kids. But it is a hard thing to say, this is how you behave at school. But I don't know how it's going at home. Rebecca, do you have some insight? I think you deal with homeschool parents, so they are having to deal with what's going on at home all the time. They don't get away from it.
Exactly. And what's coming to me is partly what I mentioned before, which was really talking to the children about how they feel, and also helping them to understand who they are. So helping to build up how they've designed, and that not everybody's the same. So someone could respond more sensitive than another person. So it really goes down to treating others the way you'd like to be treated is one thing. But also one of the techniques I used with my kids was I would ask them if what they said, if they were dealing with a conflict, if what they said was kind or not kind. And to me, it's either one or the other. You don't have, you don't have an in between. So if a person's pregnant or not pregnant, that's what it is. And why would this even play a part is that I think my approach would be more in empowering the child to help them self-regulate. So this is a skill they're going to need for life. Regardless of what's going on at home, and I know that they will model things, but helping them to understand relationships and responding instead of reacting. And when they know themselves and they can name something and say, yes, were you feeling angry, or were you mad, or were you hurt? These are important distinctions. And then they can begin to learn the skill themselves. See, I would be more in the place of how can you train their skill level?
And you're nodding your head.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I know actually Josie goes to schools and she does teach kids how to self-regulate, which is actually very admirable. Teaching them those skills so they can cope, whether they have that at home or not. Even with my daughter, it just shows you how modeling works. A few days ago on Mother's Day, I got upset. Imagine that. And my daughter came to me and she actually sat with me and she was like, "Mommy, are you okay? Are you feeling well? Can I sit with you? Can I just like, can you take a breath?"
Aw.
So when she reacts that way, when she cries, I go to her and I'll sit down with her. In the past, I didn't. Before I learned how to deal with her, I did not. I would get mad. I would get upset because I didn't know how to handle it. And I would
Huh.
literally like put her outside and just go cry yourself out, because that's what I had when I grew up. Right? I was hiding in the closet crying, but for my daughter, because I can understand her and I learned so much, I was able to teach her how to be compassionate towards somebody who has an emotional wave, right? So if I can do that for her, she can do it for me. So if as teachers, and I don't know how far you can go with that, is to even try to teach them, okay, let's go ahead and take a breath. Let's say the student comes in, they're frazzled, they're upset. Okay, can you feel that upset in your body? Can we just sit here for 2 minutes? And when they can do that, it's a life-changing event. I recently had a client who is 80 years old, and I just asked him, he was so frazzled for 3 days, and I said, like, let's go ahead and take a breath. We took a breath, and he was like, I can breathe.
Huh.
So it's never too early,
love
never too
that.
late to teach people how to breathe.
I love that. I so
Yeah.
love that. That's awesome. I
Yeah.
love what Rebecca and Josie and Yola had to say. And Tracy, this all comes down to different styles of debrief, you
Hmm.
know,
Interesting.
and, what just happened? How do you feel? Let's talk about it from your perspective. And what Rebecca was saying before about not reacting, let's take that on the flip side. How do I act? I get to choose what I can do. I might not be able to control what others are doing, but I can certainly control what I do, and I get to react, not just react. And I know you keep referring to the word control when I'm making suggestions, but that's the thing. We all feel more comfortable when the control is in our hands. So with the debrief, if we can return the control to the child's hands to help them to feel quiet and at peace and more confident and resilient in a really challenging situation, then they'll be able to continue and feel like it's going to be okay. No matter what happens, it's going to be okay because they're going to be okay.
So I have seen, and I have used it in my classroom, and I think I suspect parents are doing this too, and maybe you've done it, that you have a quiet spot for a child. It doesn't have to be in their room. I know made little tents or something, kind of like that little private space. But I was thinking one time I had huge classes, and a lot of, it depends at the type of school where you are, the population. I didn't have enough of those little corners. Just please just go and just, get a hold of yourself, or whatever is needed. But I was thinking about that one time. It was like I had another child pop off, and I had up to 40 kids in the classroom, one adult. So these are the kind of things that teachers are facing with and I have to say, I just feel like there's just more conflict going on. And it is hard, as a teacher to be able to say, it's like, it's very hard to be honest. We can't just say, you know what, I think things aren't good at home because this is what I'm seeing with your child. And we end up having to kind of put it on the child, but I don't always feel like it's the child's fault, if you know what I mean. Like Josie said, my kids are modeling what's going on around, at home and in the atmosphere. And so we're kind of in this spot of not being able to say to each other, as adults, this is having an impact. And it's not just impacting one child, your child, but they're bringing that to school and it having an impact on everybody else. And I don't want to feel like, it's a hard thing because the teacher is not the counselor. But when we're in elementary schools now without counselors, it's just a hard place to be in. So again, good advice for teachers. Have a little space where, a child can go and separate themselves. If they know, you're talking about self-regulating, teaching children those skills. So let's talk a little bit more about that. You've talked about having them be able to identify how they're feeling, but in the the activity of a classroom, when there's a whole lot of little people, and you only get a little brief second maybe to talk to a child, give us some more things that we can do as tips, both as parents, maybe. Sorry, I'm running off here, but it's just we need help. It's a child who is maybe not the cause, but is being a recipient at school, and is, somebody else has the problem, but your child is being impacted by, somebody else's emotion. And I'm sure you've had that as parents when your kids have come home from school. So let's talk about dealing with some of that kind of conflict that the kids have.
I can chime in here. This is Rebecca Prouse.
Right.
What the word that's coming to me, I know the word control was put out there, but I'd like to invite another word called responsibility. And this would be the direction I would go a little bit, is having a light conversation or talking about the elephant in the room, like as a whole, not necessarily individually, but in like something like, well, you know what? There may have been some upsetting things that happened today. Maybe today you woke up and everything went really well. Everybody has their things. And right now, like Yola had said, take a breath and just realize that, how you might be feeling, and sort of talking it out as a whole, that people are coming in and now we're going to treat each other. We're taking responsibility for our actions. And I know this may sound like a higher level, but you may have to put it at the level of the child. But the concept behind what I'm saying is the word responsibility, that they understand, or you start working toward the fact that they can own how they're feeling and they decide how they are going to respond. If that's making sense. A little bit more of it's your responsibility. Everyone's responsible for how they're showing up.
Yes.
Yes.
And if you're, I'm saying, and your child comes home and they're not the one who's the instigator, but they are feeling impacted, or worse, they're being, bullied because of something else that's going on in somebody else's household, and the child does not know how to deal with it, and it is having an effect. So your kids come home, they're having to deal with this. What's the advice? Taking responsibility for how you feel, getting control of your feelings. Anything
Tracy,
else, Josie? Go
yeah,
ahead.
I'd love to chime in on this, because I have had that happen in my own household where, one of my children have come home and not necessarily in a bad state, but have had something happen to them because of one of their friends. And knowing the inside scoop a little bit about what's going on in that friend's household through some creative investigation, if you will, because we have privacy, right? We want to be mindful and careful, but I have the right to know what's happened if my child's being impacted to a certain level. And then to explain to my child that, yes, what that person did is not right. And yes, it did impact you, but we cannot, and I'm going to use the control word again, we cannot control what other people say or do, but we can take responsibility in how we react and respond to what's happening. So it doesn't make it right that that person is maybe being mean or bullying or acting out or being conflictual with the rest of the students or even just yourself. But we can maybe come from a little place of grace and understanding that maybe that child is going through something at home that we don't understand. And maybe you don't experience that because of the home that you live in. And to explain it in terms that can make my child feel like they're not responsible for what's happening to them, but more that they are in control of how they respond to it. And then to understand and maybe give a little bit of understanding to that person, to what's happening, because again, we don't know what happens behind closed doors. We don't know what's happening inside of that person that is being the one maybe being a little bit more outrageous or bullying or acting out, because maybe they have different coping mechanisms. Maybe they don't have a good model at home to see. Maybe they don't have parents who are able to explain to them or don't take the time or can't, but we can't control any of that. And so I just tell my children, we can give a little bit of grace, and then we can bless and release those children from your world, because there's lots of other kids, whether you're homeschooling or not, you get to choose. So you get to say yes or no to that person.
And
I'd
as
like
you,
to,
oh, go right ahead.
if it's
Yeah.
okay, I'd like to expand on that because Josie made some extremely important points. And we too had lots of experiences with bullying from other kids and even from teachers, interestingly enough. So I'm going to echo everything that Josie just said and put a ditto. And I want to expand on it by saying the next part would be to discuss the action plan. If this happens again, let's talk about what you can do, what you should do, whether it's a teacher or whether it's another kid. And let's discuss what mommy or daddy can do to support you so that you don't feel like you're in this alone.
Yeah.
So basically the prep, and like when Josie was saying, take control, release with grace, but this might come up again. It probably will come up again because bullying is habitual. So what do you do if you find yourself in the same situation? And again, putting the power in your child's hand with support from you.
That's great. And this, we have done a show about, dealing with this kind of stuff at school. So, and in this one, we're saying we don't know what's going on in other people's homes. But, and I would like to know too, as parents, have you ever said anything to another parent? Things are hard
Yeah.
going on with them. Maybe it's your child's best friend and behavior is just going off the wall. Have you ever actually spoken up to another parent? Either supportive or to say, we have an issue.
More
Can I add a
about the
little bit?
issue.
Can I add a little bit more to the prior question?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, because actionable, I love what everyone said. I have a little different perspective as well, from a viewpoint of how to say it, but from a victim energy, right? So it depends of how often it happens to the child. If it happens perpetually, it's a different story versus it happens with one child. Because if it happens all the time, many times parents end up moving children to different school, and the same situation may happen over and over. I had that with my teachers, where I had two teachers who were bullying me when I was in school. What I learned 20, 30 years later was that I was giving off energy of being timid and being very subdued. So when they looked at me, it kind of perpetuated in that predator energy. When I could stand up straight, when I could go and talk to the teachers, when I could truly stand in my power, then it didn't cause that same behavior. So what I teach my children is, first of all, do not ever be afraid of the teachers. Always go and talk to them. With other kids, you do not cower down. You do not do this position. you actually stand up straight. It's the same like with lions, right? If lion wants to, or like animals, wild animals want to attack you, right? If you really cower down and run away, they're gonna chase you. If you stand up big and tall, they're much less likely to do it. And the other thing I usually recommend for parents is to send them to Krav Maga, any type of martial arts where they teach you to stand up straight and be in your own power, because that's going to serve them for the rest of their life. If I go and talk to one parent, that's going to change only maybe that one situation, maybe not. But if I teach them how to truly stand up for themselves, how to own themselves, that's going to serve them the rest of their lives, with bosses, with friends, with colleagues, with anyone.
So we're all careful about not stepping on other parents' toes, and what's going on with them, and it's their children and their household. But as relationship coaches and as family, let's kind of come back a little bit here and talk about we talked about at the beginning of the show, and let's just kind of recap a bit here about, yes, we were talked about ways to argue and better ways to argue, but also being mindful of the kids in that. And so as we're let's recap some of that a little bit and keep it in mind. Your best advice for dealing with conflict as an adult, and then being mindful of the effect that it is having on kids. I was surprised in the research to see that children as young as 6 months are impacted. And I think, do we think about babies? I mean, with our really little tiny ones, if it's having an impact, being mindful of that too, that our words or our tone is having an effect. So let's kind of come back full circle here and just hit on that a little bit more. Anybody want to jump in?
Sure,
You
I
know
can
what?
jump in.
Oh, go ahead. You
Okay,
Yeah,
we'll give everybody a chance here as we're kind of winding up here.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, Yola. Go ahead.
Yes. Arguments. First, how to argue or have a conflict more effectively. It's listening. It's a very basic skill of listening. If we can teach that to our kids, one parent can do that. Both parents don't have to participate. When one parent says, instead of fighting back and defending themselves, they can just say, I hear you. Let me just hear what's on your heart, what's on your mind.
Mhm.
And this whole conversation is just going to be different because this one person was willing to listen. Now we model that to the children so they can go to school and do the same thing. And let me listen to what the problem is, instead of trying to build a rebuttal right then and there. So that's the very basic skill to stop the fighting or decrease the amount of fights. And then how quickly it affects children, it affects them even in the womb. Because when I was like, for example, depressed during my pregnancy, my daughter was born with a lot of very high emotional anxiety because we were arguing, my family. I'm an example of really bad fighting going really badly and
Mm.
really affecting my children, which I had to undo a lot of that.
Mm.
So they got affected really quickly because the stress levels go up. The cortisol, we're constantly in fight or flight when we argue with our spouse.
Mm.
And then that gets passed on to the children. So when we can create that safety, first, stop the arguing first, show them love, show listening to them as well. When they are upset, instead of like sweeping up under the rug and go cry in your room, it's actually sit down with them. Okay, can I just sit with you? Are you okay? And kind of growing up a little bit as parents, right? Because I know we are all sucked into this emotion. But when we come down, even going after that and just saying, hey, I know it happened. What can we do?
And we can just say that to our little one, our really
Yeah.
little ones too, giving
Yeah.
them calmness.
Mhm.
All right, Rebecca, jump in.
Yeah, so what I was thinking about was the word energy, because you're talking about a 6-month-old. I do remember this particular thing happening with my daughter being about that age in the high chair at the dining room table. And my husband was upset with his parents about something, and his tone, he wasn't yelling or arguing, but his tone was not one that she heard. And I saw her nonverbal communication look at me for affirmation. And I know when I spoke to my husband, he's like, oh, she doesn't know. I'm like, well, I felt something happen there. So what I'm talking about and I'm going to go back to, I mean, Josie started out with love, and I mentioned seek to understand. If you're coming from the energy of love and you can keep yourself there, even if your spouse is coming in with their energy, and that would be one of the key things I would say, to have a check on your own energy. And as the woman in the house, we're like the gatekeeper. And one thing that's really important is for us to remember how we self-nurture, how we take care of ourselves so that we can show up that way. I'm sure everyone knows if you're tired and things have, and you're spread really thin, it's harder to show up like that. And so I would say that's a good preventative measure, is to really be mindful of what rejuvenates you. And if you've been through something tough or a tough time in your schedule, to really give yourself that time so that you can show up aware of your energy and aware of the nonverbal communication that's happening.
Excellent. Josie?
Yeah, actually, that is a very good segue to where my words were going to come from. And it was coming from the feeling, coming from, yes, that nonverbal energy, because sometimes we're talking about how parents argue and supporting our children during parent arguments. I grew up listening to my parents argue. And like I said earlier, it was scary for me. I mean, my mom would then come and explain things to me. But what happens, what I see a lot of right now, is that silent argument. Just because the children actually feel our energy when we don't even realize they are, whether they're from in the womb or newborns, we're all humans and we're receptive to the energy that's around us, whether we are actually consciously aware of it or not. And so oftentimes we might say, oh, my husband and I, or my partner and I, we never argue, but you might have conflict, and it might be silent conflict. And children feel that even more so sometimes than words. Because the words, they know, oh, mom's angry or dad's angry or they're having a disagreement, and they might not be able to verbalize that yet because they're very little, but they feel, you can almost say, that silent tension. And so if you're silently disagreeing or silently feeling some resentment but not speaking it because that's how you were brought up, we need to end that so that our children don't repeat that same pattern. And because it does become generational. I look at even my own family and going back saying, oh my gosh, there was divorce and conflict there. And then another generation back, there was divorce and conflict there, and another generation back. So let's look at how we can stop that cycle, and not just with, sometimes verbal arguing might actually be better than that silent, quiet, nobody knows what's really going on and they feel the tension. So I've learned, because my husband and I, we didn't argue for so many years, but he's very quiet and I'm not. If you but he would oftentimes just retreat and say, and he'd agree with me. And it became more of me like having that silent disagreement with him. Like, you're not even putting the energy into disagreeing with me when I know you're not. And that tension alone, I would see it in my children, where all of a sudden they would come to me and start loving on me and hugging me for no, like, I would say no reason. I'll take it anytime. But then when I stepped back and went, ooh, that's because dad and I maybe didn't communicate properly. And then I learned skills through a relationship coach to help me use certain words when I can't do something, or certain words, out of love and compassion when I needed to maybe just distance myself from a situation, but still to create harmony in our conflict. And that sounds like a bit of an oxymoron, but really the kids will then model that. It all comes down to them modeling. How can we support them the best? Model the good behavior. And I'm going to use the word good behavior, but model, show an example of how to argue effectively and how not to put that energy, that negative energy, through silence that they might feel. How to get rid of that.
Rosie, this is
Yes.
just so spot on. If I can just add to that a little bit thing, like tiny bit thing, I have this analogy of two trees holding a hammock, and the two trees are the two parents. And when they're really safe in themselves, they're deeply rooted and they look each other in the eyes and they're really safe, the kids in the hammock can feel it. So it's a very stable hammock, right? But as soon as the parents get into disagreement, whether it's a verbal or it's very quiet, because I've had couples where they wouldn't talk for months. And they're like, we'd never fight because they just don't talk to each other. and we're going to stay together just for the children. I'm like, do you think that the children don't feel it? They feel it because that hammock is not stable. So they can feel every single shift. When the parents look each other in the eyes and they love each other, it's very stable. When they argue, they disagree, they don't talk each other, they avoid each other. Look how strange that is for the children to feel that emotional roller coaster that they have to go on with the parents.
That's a great analogy. I know I'll remember that really well. And we have a hammock up. I'll think about that. Thank you. Okay, Marjie.
I'll bring this full circle from what I stated
Yes.
at the top of this panel. Words, tone, delivery, they matter with whomever we are communicating with. And let's introduce one more strategy to diffusing conflict in a way that the children will actually enjoy. Can you take a guess what that is? Humor. Sometimes in the heat of an argument, the best thing to do is just make a joke, either with a physical action or with something that you say, and then everyone cracks up. The bottom line is nobody wants to sit or stand or hear somebody else going at it. We're all uncomfortable, no matter if we're 6 months old in the womb or we're 60 plus. It's very uncomfortable to hear two other people bicker or fight. So the easiest way to diffuse, and we've done this on occasion, of course, is to put some humor, lighten things up a little bit, show that it's really not the big deal that everybody's making it out to be. And once you start to laugh, then the kids start to laugh and they say, you know what? Everything's going to be fine. It's just a disagreement. It's, mom and dad, or maybe some of the kids at school. But if you can find some sort of fun and light, then you can get through it to the other side.
That's great. That is telling me that you have good control.
Tracy, can I add a sentence to that? I have
Sure.
a sentence to that
Okay.
you just, I'm just saying real quick, when in doubt, dance it out. That's what we do in our family. Like when we're like confused, frustrated, I'll just pop music on and I'll just start dancing and my kids will look going, what are you doing? And I'm like, I got to get this energy out. I got to get my negative energy out. I got to shake it out and I got to dance it out. Come dance with me. I don't care if you don't feel like it, just come dance with me. And in the end, we're all laughing. We're all in a better energy. And then we can communicate better because we're not coming from a place of anger or frustration. We're coming from a place where that energy's been released and we can actually be our true selves.
And thank you. And ladies, I feel better having listened to all of your great advice. We don't talk about this so much. And unless, privately you are seeking some help, it's nice to be able to have this forum and you all come at it in different ways, but yet you all are saying the same thing, that, we are being very mindful of the kids, that we're communicating through, verbal and nonverbal ways. And, we want to be the adult in the room, right? And you've all just brought so much, compassion to this, and there's no judgment about this, and we accept that there's going to be disagreements. And so I just love what you've brought to this, not only to our moms but teachers that listen to this too. It applies to all of us in the workplace as well, because we are jostling elbows with other people in a lot of part of our day. So anyway, I just thank you so much for coming on. We love having our monthly get-togethers on a topic of interest to mom communities. And so we were glad to have this suggestion. It was like, okay, we can talk about this, a hard one, but you all made it just accessible and friendly and loving. And I think we can all take away just feeling, walking away this morning going, I do feel better after talking about this. Maybe there's just something you've been holding on your heart that, you've needed to hear. And this is it, having moms, supporting moms, people who are right in the middle of it with you. And We just love supporting you out there, moms. We love being part of your village of support, because raising kids is not an easy thing, but it's a great thing. And I just have to say to all moms, to my moms here on the panel, raising, responsible adults, that's where we're all heading. In this time of being a mom, I just want to give you a big hug and say thank you, because we see the good result, as teachers, we see the good results that you're doing. And we here at Workshops for Moms love being able to talk about anything that you want to know about, because there is a mom here somewhere that's dealing with the same thing that you are, and you're not alone in this motherhood journey. So with that, we want to say goodbye, and I love you all, panelists. Thank you so much. I've put links in the chat if you can reach all of these speakers, but in the replay and on our YouTube channel, all those links will be there. So you can reach out to anybody on the panel. They'd love to hear from you. As you can tell, they're all really giving, really supportive of moms, and take them up on it. They put out a link for you to call up and have a chat. Do it. They're going to be your best supporter. Okay. You heard them live today. In the recording, it will be there forever. You will just enjoy their love anytime you need to. All right, everybody. Thank you again, Marjie Hadad and Yola Cruz, Rebecca Prouse, and Josie Laporto Freeborn. Thank you so much for joining me, Tracy Cheney, at Workshops for Moms. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.